For more on what this recording from President Trump could mean for Georgia's runoff elections tomorrow, we are joined right now by North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator, we want to talk to you about the U.S. rollout of the coronavirus vaccine, but first we want to ask you about that audio from President Trump. I'm assuming you've heard it. What do you think?
Yeah, Becky, thank you and good morning. I listened to all 62 minutes of it last night. It sounded very familiar to me because I've had a lot of phone calls with the president, and he is a strong, dominating personality, as we know, and pretty much everybody else that's in the room or on the phone is much more timid. That said, I frankly don't find the offense that a lot of people see in it when you listen to all 62 minutes. He was going through some pretty basic math, and he believes, of course, that there was fraud in several fronts from, 5,000 dead people voting, again, his claims, not mine, 5,000 dead people voting, some people voting twice, people voting illegally, and all that math adds up to much more than the margin that he lost by. And that was the context of the conversation. I didn't get a sense he was pressuring anybody, but rather stating facts and talking about the math he needs to make up if he was to overturn this election.
I heard where he suggested that there were 500 dead people that voted in Fulton County, and the pushback from the Republicans in the state said, right, no, there were two dead people that we found on the rolls. Yeah. Do you believe the math that he believes? Is there anything that you've heard to this point that would cause you to vote against ratifying the Electoral College results?
Yeah, that's a great point, because that really gets to the heart of what I think the problem is, and that is that the referee in this game is also the defendant in the sense that it's the Secretary of State. I don't know whether it was 2 or whether it was 5,000, but one of the issues that I thought was probably the most informative in this phone call was when the lawyers talked about the inability of one side, in this case the president's team, to have access to person-specific data. That is something other than a name and a birth year. And that's what's publicly available. That's how they draw the conclusion there are 5,000. But if they don't get to see that data, then it's Becky, it's why instant replay works so well in the NFL. It's not because the same referee looks under the hood. It's because they show it on the Jumbotron. That's why a fumble has to be a fumble. And I think it's important that there is a more transparent process. That said, I'm not prejudging it by any means, and I do have concerns about Congress overstepping its constitutional authorities in objecting to the Electoral College.
Well, Senator, we should focus on that. The referee in this case is a Republican, the Secretary of State. The Constitution has it set up that the states control the elections.
That's right.
And I should focus on the last part that you said. You haven't seen anything that would cause you to vote against ratifying these results.
What I have seen, though, is there's a great distrust around the country, not just by Donald Trump, but by lots of people. And polls show anywhere from 17 to 30% of Democrats believe that the election was either rigged or that there was fraud. That has to be adjudicated in some public forum. Courts have failed to take it up. States are defending themselves, whether they're Republican officials or Democratic officials.
The courts have taken this up.
No, the courts have largely punted it away, Becky, and that's still not satisfactory.
The courts have decided that they didn't want to overrule the votes of millions of voters. That's what the lawyers have asked them to do in many of these cases.
But they've not had adequate hearings to demonstrate in a public arena their reasoning for that. All of this needs to be settled to the satisfaction of the voters of this country, or there's always going to be distrust. I mean, we went through an entire phony impeachment process, completely partisan, with made up. In fact, the evidence they used to impeach the president actually vindicated the president. All the while, we should have been fighting the spread of coronavirus in the early stages, and that was perpetrated not just by the left, but by a lot of members of the media. So I don't think the sky is falling. I think that dealing with the Electoral College, I come from a red, small state. I don't want to have our votes overturned by other members of Congress from other places. I don't see in the Constitution where we even actually have that authority, quite honestly, and I read it again this morning to be sure. But all of that said, I do think there has to be some sort of a commission. I'm working with colleagues to find a way. Ted Cruz has one plan. I think there can be other plans, maybe more effective plans than the one he has. I think there has to be some sort of a commission, bipartisan, that looks at not just this election, but at reforms going forward so that we can avoid this in the future.
Senator, this issue of distrust, and when you do look at the polls, I absolutely agree with you that there seems to be a level of distrust that is disturbing. Having said that, you can look at how we came to this moment and maybe you'll disagree with me, but I think you can look over and over again over the last several months. The president, even before the election, was talking about election fraud, was talking about that possibility. Other members of the party talked about it repeatedly over and over and over and over again. The election then happens. The president then says there's election fraud, there's election fraud, there's election fraud. The courts, by the way, disagree with him or don't take it up, but don't take it up because they disagree with him to some extent. I think you have to agree with that. And now everybody stands around and says, well, everybody distrusts what happened because they think that there's election fraud. I mean, it's circular logic, no?
It sounds a lot like the last 4 years when the battle cry of the left was Russian collusion, Russian collusion, Russian collusion, and $40 million in 2 years of an independent counsel that a lot of Republicans supported, by the way, because they wanted to restore trust. And I'd just like to see some Democrats say, yeah, let's help restore trust in this case, and let's have the type of transparent public process that the American people can watch with some third parties. I'm not a big advocate of overturning the Electoral College. Again, I don't even think we have that authority in the Constitution of the United States for Congress. But Congress does have to do something because everyone else is pretty much balked, including state legislatures and courts. So this distrust isn't going to go away. And by the way, at least the people that I work for in North Dakota, they don't take their cues from me. I try to take mine from them in this representative republic, as long as it fits in the context of the Constitution and my conscience.
So, question, Senator, is there a way to separate out the issue of looking into election reforms, and I'm not suggesting to punt it, but to separate it from this election itself, or do you think that's impossible?
I think that's the perfect question.
Because I think there's a distinction here.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Andrew. You've hit the nail on the head in my view. I think that's exactly what we ought to do, and that's why there are a group of us actually working together to try to find a way to do exactly that. I think the Ted Cruz plan is noble, and I don't argue with his, his motives by any means, but I do worry that not separating those two clouds the issue and really doesn't do what we need to get done, and that is to have some sort of an independent commission, or at least a bipartisan commission. Maybe it's congressional hearings themselves, but we have to get to it, and we have to do it in a public manner, and we have to take the time. You know, I heard on that call where the Secretary of State was talking about, well, we gave an hour and a half of our time, and I thought that was quite arrogant, to say the least. It's not your time, it's the people's time, and an hour and a half isn't very much, it's very little. We need to have a long, robust, transparent discovery process so that people can feel comfortable with this. But I agree with you. Trying to find a way to separate these two issues, I think, is really important.
Senator Cramer, Ron Johnson was with us last week, Senator Johnson, and he has had hearings on this. He said as of last week, he hadn't seen evidence that would cause him to vote against it yet, but he was open to hearing about more evidence. I guess, how many congressional hearings do we need?
Well, certainly more than one, and Ron is the only person in Congress that's done his job with regard to this. He happens to chair the Committee of Jurisdiction, which obviously helps. I think you can have many more than a couple of hours worth. And you have to have, again, the transparency of it, much like a congressional hearing does. But you have to be able to get to evidence based on an evidentiary standard. As I said earlier, one of the problems that one side of this issue has is that they don't have that per-person data. What I mean by that is you have a birth date and a name, or not even a birth date, but a birth year and a name, but you don't have a social security number, nor should you, by the way. But somebody needs to be able to have access to make sure that it's not 5,000 dead people that voted versus dead people that voted, or 50,000 versus 500, or whatever the numbers might be. That's really important to get people's confidence back. But we can do all of that, whether it's in a congressional hearing, preferably in a courtroom, but it needs to be done some way to restore this confidence that's missing now.
Senator, very quickly, let's talk about the pandemic rollout of these vaccines. What you've seen to this point, we've seen fingers kind of blame pointing back and forth, whether it be at the federal level or at the state level. How has the rollout gone in your state, and what do you think you need to see more of in order to make sure that we're vaccinating everybody that we possibly can?
Well, it shouldn't surprise anybody that North Dakota has gone quite well. We've got good leadership with our governor and within our healthcare officials, and they've taken the incredible work that Operation Warp Speed, and by the way, no president in my lifetime could have done what Donald Trump did with regards to getting this vaccine, multiple vaccines done before the end of last year. But obviously the ball's been dropped at several state levels, local levels. It's as though people didn't know it was coming. They were so ill prepared for it, and that's a pretty serious problem in my view. So I don't know whether some of the plans have been talked about of partial or half doses and all that, whether that works or not, that's above my pay grade. But the federal government clearly has exceeded the expectations of the vast majority of Americans, and maybe that's why the vast majority of states weren't well prepared, because they didn't believe that it could be done.
Senator Cramer, I want to thank you for your time. Obviously, we've got more to talk about, and we will have you back soon. Thank you.
We'll do it. Thank you.